I mentioned this a couple of months ago about an executive order passed in September last year. And I believe I mentioned then that we are still awaiting some systemic effects to confirm that this is not just scribble on paper. Now there are ample confirmations, so I think it's appropriate to resurface this in a consolidated form. And the executive order basically permitted private equity companies to access US pension funds in order to finance infrastructure projects. And we are talking to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, these infrastructure projects are more notably, as it ties to Iran, are the 20 something percent allocated for power generation, grid upgrade, electrification, and so forth, with another 20% on AI data centers and their accompanying infrastructure. Now, everything I just said here can be open for broader conversation, but this pertains to Iran if you focus on one specific resource input, and that is copper. That is the one metal that the Americans are going to be requiring the most and have the biggest choke point on. And just so you kind of know how much they need this, you're having for-profit corporations like Amazon buying dead copper mines. Dead copper mines are no longer profitable or even considered cost effective for strategic reasons, yet we are having for profit corporations beginning to buy them. So, why is this important? Because copper mining has been underinvested for decades, and the most high grade reserves have been depleted. So, when you couple that with the fact that even if you were to know where some reserves were, it takes on an average 1 to 2 decades before a mine yields any significant output. So you have a structural supply constraint meeting the structural demand that the Americans have in their reindustrialization project. And this is where Iran comes into play. For Iran has some sizable copper mines and rather substantial reserves, accounting for about 5 to 7% of global copper production, which may not sound like much, but in this context, it's quite important. Um, Now, it actually doesn't just stop there, because if you are an institutional planner, you're going to be seeing a glaring budgetary threat coming on here. You're seeing big investors positioning themselves by buying dead copper mines. Now, that's maybe good for investors, but for institutional planners, you run the very real risk of having a budgetary implosion where you end up with a slew of half finished infrastructure projects. Iran will help, but they're already making it clear that they're going to be needing a substitute, and the substitute here is aluminum or aluminium. Now, Iran does have the bauxite ore, the principal raw material for making the metal, but it's less of a miner story like you would have with copper, and more of a smelter story, meaning that the bottleneck here is actually energy. Now, I don't need to deliberate on that. I'm pretty sure everyone is well aware about the ample energy reserves that Iran has. So I'll wrap this up with how this pertains to China. For you have like this, for lack of better wording, holy trinity of the Americans' reindustrialization found in a neat little package called Iran. That's good for the Americans, but it's also bad for the Chinese. It's already been discussed of the sanctioned discounted raw materials like oil. Now you're aware also of the copper and aluminum, which again China is the biggest consumer of. And the reason this becomes very important is because China is by far the biggest consumer of copper on this planet. Look on any copper mine, the bigger copper mines in the world, they're typically among the top three buyers. So if Iran gets liberated and you have a resolution in Ukraine where sanctioned discounted Russian oil suddenly enters the market again, the leverage that the Americans will have against the Chinese is going to be substantial. For the Chinese industrial dominance is very much relying on heavy subsidization and compelling the corporations to operate on razor-thin margins that are notably enabled by these sanctioned discounts. So I think there is with all that being said, I believe that is going to be reinforcing the Americans' resolve to persecute the Islamic occupiers. So yeah, that I believe that was it. Thank you for the time to be elaborating. I hope it was coherent enough.
Yes, thank you, Uncle Hoping. Armin, do you have anything to respond or should I move
No,
on?
we could go to the people that wanted to respond.
Okay, Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, Uncle brought up a really good point. One of the things we looked at in developing policy for the current administration before they even got on board was how to best sit there and pursue onshoring and or reindustrializing the United States, not the least of which is when it comes to Iran, building out our national defense industrial base, specifically where it comes to things like critical munitions, because conflicts will be very dependent upon critical munitions. And of course, that has all these other more basic supplemental or like supporting industries. So he's not wrong. That's a very interesting point that's overlooked quite often, Uncle. Well done.
I was surprised that this connection has not been made because it's been there for months, and I've been expecting at some point someone's going to make it. But since they haven't, I figured, okay, well, this must be the best place to go. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you both. Shauna, you're next.
I think this is really great. Good job, Coping. But also, I want to point out that one of the things that's really important about making sure that it's being somewhat nationalized or at least being controlled under federalism in some way is that one of the biggest, this is something I've recently discovered, is one of the biggest negators of growing some of our industries has actually just been local governments blocking things or blocking things by just sitting on their hands and not doing anything. So basically letting things die out by just sitting still because then their properties can gain value and they don't have to change their little habits or whatever, XYZ, whatever. So having these, like, sometimes in order to drill baby drill, you have to go federal. This is really great. I'm super in support of it. We also will should be prepared for some backlash politically, at least on the Americans front. Yep, exactly. Coping, environmental regulations, blah 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 blah. So, yep, just that's it.
Thank you. And Sketch.
We have sort of discussed this before. We just not haven't gone into this particular detail about the copper. I think it's a good topic. I think it's a good thing to point out. We're also involved in a lot of friendshoring, not just onshoring, right? So what we're doing is our companies, this would be part of friendshoring. Our companies would be involved in places like Argentina, in places like Venezuela, in other places where we have friendly governments. Japan is doing some work into rare earth metals, and everywhere in the world, which Iran would become part of our friendshoring, have our companies there so that it's not just involving our natural resources. We would have friends that help us decouple from China and what we need from their rare earth minerals, and also decoupling from their fabrication and processing. Because one of the problems with rare earth minerals, it's not just getting it, it's that the people that do the most processing of these rare earth, because it's very difficult and very dirty, is China. So we like to hide it behind that red curtain, and then the tree huggers here want us to stop using oil without mentioning the fact that when we don't do it, it gets done over there and it gets done far dirtier, right? So friendshoring and onshoring, while it might have some cost in as far as processing in a better way, I believe long term it's better for the whole planet. Like, I'm not a hippie tree hugger, but I do understand that if you don't do this processing in a responsible manner, it does have consequences. The same going with AI centers and data centers. Data centers is the far bigger problem as far as water tables, just because of their size. Like, an AI per square foot may take up more water, but the data centers are so large that they're a bigger problem for water. I understand that. I understand that we have to be conscious of the water tables, but I don't want to become a Malthusian. I don't, Malthusians never win the Simon Ehrlich wager, right? You can't bet that technology won't improve and we won't find better ways to deal with dead mines. Shale was one of the things that made great advancements and gave us benefits as far as oil. So, it's good to take into account technology, but friendshoring and onshoring is going to help in this. And it's good to have an eye out for the particulars in the way that you just brought up.
Thank you, Sketch. Shauna wanted to add more stuff to this.
Oh, just really, really quick too. I just when we talk about reshoring and friendshoring, something that maybe we should also remember is, like when Americans are like polled about bringing back jobs, they oftentimes think about factories, but then most of them, when polled, also wouldn't work at those said factories. And they're talking about like making shoes, making t-shirts, that kind of stuff. So when it comes to friendshoring and technology, while we're talking about the big money makers, something we need to like consider is also like the things that people need. Yes, exactly. Sketch cobblers. Bring back cobbling. Make cobbling great again, or friendshore the cobbling. Until Elon gives us robots to make all of our t-shirts, we have to consider that those are still jobs that people do.
Wait, I have a question. Why did you say data centers use a lot of water? It's not like the water disappears. The water is still there. They just use the water for cooling. Why do like
Well,
yeah.
I'll explain. There's a lot of open source intel, and this is like a reality. Like I know that some people are not aware of this. I would not tell you to trust me, but don't also off the because there's a lot of illogical hate of AI. It's not logical. It's stupidity because sometimes they say, "Oh, but the AI uses so much energy." Yeah, but it's going to take another energy to have that guy take a week to do it. That guy is going to spend energy, air conditioning, food. So there's a lot of illogical things against AI, but the water use is an issue that should be considered. I would love AI.
I checked it, so I was wrong. By the way, people in the chat are telling me they use it for cooling. I know what they use the water for. I just thought when they use it for cooling, then the water gets hot, but you still have the water there. It's not like it disappears, but apparently it does into the air. So up to 85% of the water they pull from the city turns into vapor and floats away. Okay, so I was wrong. Apparently the water does float away. Okay, but sorry.
Yes, I was just pointing that out. I love AI, and I know that people that love AI, people like Armin that really love AI, I know you face a lot of retards. I feel your pain and having to deal with these anti-AI people. And you know what? I know you're not a very religious person, but I'm going to bless you in your fight against anti-AI retards.
Yes, yes. You know, I am an atheist, but I do think that we will one day create God with AI. Okay. But until then, I'm an atheist. Okay. And by the way, that would be an interesting topic if anybody wants to at some point talk about that. I think we will create God. So it's only the only question is if it's going to be a benevolent God. That's the question. Okay.
Okay. Super chats, Armin.
Oh no, I will let you know if we have super chats. We already reached our goal. That's why we're not getting any super chats because we got 10 super chats. But I mean, if you want more, we could get more. But yeah, we have no super chat and no updates.
No updates, you said?
No updates. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
keeping an eye.